What's up guys, Michał from Tech Test Tutorials, and I often get a question, how much money do I have to spend on my gaming computer? As you can probably imagine, the answer is usually, well, that depends. Depends on your budget, depends on whether you are going to play 4K, what your upgrade cycle is going to be. Everyone who have built computers knows that, right? But what if someone just wants to get on board as cheap as possible? Most of monitors people have are still 1080, although the 4K gaming is here and VR is just around the corner. Majority of gamers will still stick to 1080 and will do so for a year or two. So I decided to make a video how to build a PC with 1080 gaming in mind, but my approach is going to be a little bit different. This is not going to be an AMD APU build. I will use Intel CPU and Nvidia GPU. I also like SSD very much and can't imagine a computer with just HDD drive. And I like aluminum cases. And I know that doesn't sound cheap, right? So how are we going to do that? Rule number 1. Don't be afraid to buy used parts. Most of the Intel CPUs are going to last a very long time. If you can check the unit as you buy it or return it if there is a problem, you can't go wrong with that. Can't say the same thing about AMD CPUs, but Intel is pretty safe. I bought Ivy Bridge 3350 Core i5 for $100. I knew that was a good price, but after some more negotiations I even got a free dead motherboard. At the moment I didn't know if I was going to be able to repair it, but never say never if you are getting something for free. When I got home and started to do some tests, it was quickly obvious what was the problem with the motherboard. There was a little bit conductive thermal paste on the CPU socket. This time I got lucky and was able to clean it, but most of the time if there is a problem with CPU socket, the motherboard is probably actually lost. But that's not the point. The point is, all you need is an Ivy Bridge i5 and motherboard with a PCIe 3.0, and that's basically it. If your CPU is not a K part, you don't need a fancy chipset. The simple motherboard will cost you around $30. For $130 you can get a motherboard and a CPU, and that's cool. Sometimes it will take some time to find actually the right part if you are going to buy something used, but just be patient. Rule number 2. Not every part is cheaper if you buy it used. In most cases this rule applies when it comes to RAM. Now I don't know if that's the world trend or is it just here in Europe, but most of those used RAM is almost as pricey as the new parts. And often there are some problems with those parts, so I would recommend buying a new RAM. If you are going to use a discrete GPU, you don't need a super fast RAM. A standard DDR3 1600 MHz 8GB 2x4 in stick configuration is going to do the job just great. Also, buying a used SSD is not a great idea. If you can't afford it right now, just get a cheap HDD drive and upgrade later. SSD won't make your games run faster. It will make your games load faster, but not run faster. This will make, however, your overall experience a better one. So it's always nice to get an SSD. But if you can't afford it at the beginning, you should be good with the mechanical drive for the start, just to get you off the ground. Rule number 3. Pick the case and the power supply as the last items. In order to be sure what kind of power supply you will need, you need to know what components you will have, especially the GPU. The graphics card can limit your case choices, especially if you would like the computer case to be a small one. Some cards are tall or long and they will not fit in a smaller cases, or they will basically just make your building experience a nightmare. So choose wisely. It is nice to have a high-end modular power supply, but the mid-range one with enough power should do the job just fine. Just prepare yourself for some difficulties with cable management, and sometimes you will have to buy some adapters. But basically the case is all about the aesthetics. It's all about the form factor you would like this computer to be. I really like the Lian Li that I've got. I've got this case for free. but it's an amazing aluminum case. It looks stunning, although the building experience was not the best one that I had, but the way how this case look, man, it's great. Rule number 4. Spend most of your money on your graphic card. If you have a quad-core CPU, PCIe Gen 3 motherboard, 8GB of RAM, this will not bottleneck your GPU, unless you are going to do something crazy, but everything up to GTX960 and in some cases even 970 should be just fine. If you are team green for the 1080, something like GTX 960 should be great. I knew I didn't want it to go with the 970 cause it costed a little bit more than I just wanted to spend. I wanted to have a decent 960 though. In my opinion, the best one you can get is one from EVGA. Not only it will be power efficient, it will look great, and you will need only a 400 watt power supply. I got 500 just in case. But you will have quite a few flavors to choose from. You can get a 2GB or 4GB model. Modern games are becoming more and more VRAM hungry, so best pick the 4GB model. When it comes to EVGA, you can choose from super clocked, super clocked, or for the Win edition. Pick the one you can afford. I got a super clocked 4GB, and all the benchmarks at the end of this video have been done with that card. Rule number 5. Always try to think about overall build cost, not about the cost of a single component. What I mean, for example, an older GTX 960 is a very nice card, right? Actually, it's performing about the same as the 960, but it's an older architecture and will require a bigger power supply. If you will find a significantly cheaper 760, then just go for it. But remember, you will lose some of the modern features like HDMI 2.0 for example. The card will also be louder. That was not what I wanted. If you are going to buy an AMD 290 or 290X, not only you will need more power for PSU, but your case will have to support a longer cards and will have to have a very good airflow, because these AMD cards can dissipate a lot of heat into the case. So there is much more to think about it in terms of price than just how much one component costs. You have to think about the overall cost at the end when you are choosing a one component. Here is a list of all components. Now you will notice that I didn't include the price of some parts that I actually got for free, like motherboard or case. Now here is the thing, I bought a relatively expensive SSD. You could easily save about 40 bucks there and buy a budget case. Also the HDD drive is a one that I simply took from the older system that I disassembled. That was my old HTPC, which this machine will also replace. So although you will find a few price missing, you should be basically able to achieve the same overall cost if you will get a cheaper SSD and case, or you will just go with HDD drive. I also didn't include operating system cost because I updated my old Windows 7 to Windows 10. You can still do it for free. Now here's a pro tip. You may find a case with a motherboard and CPU that will have a COA with a Windows 7. You can still update that to Windows 10. There are a lot of such systems on eBay, just try to find one. I wouldn't recommend buying one of those activation numbers for Windows 10 for like 10 bucks now. I know some people are doing that. In my opinion, it is something not right with those licenses, but it's eventually up to you. Now it's benchmarking time. So I have done some synthetics benchmark just to give you an easy point to compare your system against the one that I have built. Here is the Valley and the Fire Strike. You can take a look at those scores. Now the thing is that the synthetics benchmark are not the most accurate way to test your computer. It's better to do the benchmarking in a game. With that being said, a small comparison, here is the score achieved by my friend's computer. He, for example, decided to go CPU-wise the AMD way, and he took the famous 8350 and Zotac 960 4GB. And look, actually his score was slightly lower than mine, despite having a CPU that costed twice as much as my use 3350. So that's something to keep in mind. I have also tested the computer with 3 games that I'm playing right now. That's not a proper benchmark, I know, but you should be able to see how these games are doing. Witcher 3 is the most graphic intense game that I have, and with the graphics settings set up to high and almost all post-processing enabled, we are sitting at mid to low 40s. You could drop a few settings here and there and make the game run a little bit smoother, so no real problem here. Battlefront was even better. With the graphics set to Ultra at 1080, it was consistent 50 to 60 FPS. Again, if you drop a few settings here and there without compromising the quality that much, you would be sitting at very smooth 60 to 70 FPS. A very nice gaming experience, way above that what you can get with the latest generation of consoles. So I guess mission accomplished there. The third game that I actually play a lot is Red Crucible, an online FPS. It was very important for me to have here as much frames per second as possible, and again with the graphics set as high as possible at 1080, it was a very satisfying 70 to 100 FPS all the time. Sure that the graphics is not stunning here, but this game shows that the CPU can actually keep up with the GPU and allow the system to generate also a bit higher frame rate. So this is a very important thing if you are using that kind of CPU that I have chose. Also, during all the benchmarks, the GPU was not overclocked above what you get out of a box. So we have a potential benefit of overclocking here, and with the cooler on this card and the delivery system that EVGA implemented here, we could have a very nice overclock with this card, so that's also something worth mentioning. Guys, I really hope that you had fun watching this video. Please remember to hit that like button, especially if you have watched the whole thing. Drop a comment if you would like to add something or ask a question. I will try to answer all of them. Subscribe for more content in the future, and see you next time.